Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second session of Social Value Live. I'm Holly Ty, Specification Editor at Assemble Media Group, and our topic for today is designing and delivering neurodivergent friendly spaces. As a society, we've taken big steps towards normalising and embracing neurodiversity, so this is a subject that I'm really excited to explore today. We'll be looking at what it means to be neurodivergent, the importance of sensory-friendly design, and some real-world examples of successful neurodivergent-friendly spaces. We're joined by three panellists: Simone West, who's the Inclusive Design Advisor at TfL, Riette Oosthuizen, who's Planning Partner at HTA, and Clive Hall, the Director at BDG Architecture and Design. I will pass over to our first speaker shortly, but a little housekeeping from me before we start. If you click on resources, which will be on the top left of your screen, you'll be able to download all the slides from today's session. Once we've heard from our speakers, there will be time at the end for a Q&A. I have already been sent in some questions in advance, but please do keep sending them in and we'll tackle as many as we can at the end of the session. I also just want to flag that this session and all our other sessions are available free on demand for 12 months via the same link that you joined by today. So if you want to rewatch or share with a colleague, then please do. I won't take up any more of your time, so I'm going to pass over to our first speaker, Simone. Over to you.
Thank you, Holly. Right, I'm going to share my slides with you. Okay, can you just confirm that you're seeing that okay?
That's perfect, Simone. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'm primarily going to talk to you today about the PAS. TfL were the main sponsors for the PAS, and actually the development of this started for us quite a long time ago. And then we got other sponsors on board to match fund, and then work with BSI. So it's developed through a steering group, so an expert steering group contributing their knowledge of research, experience, etc. And then a technical author pulls all that together under the editorial guidance of BSI. So basically, our understanding at TfL, and I think everybody's understanding anyway, is that environments can provide comfort, they can enhance our experience, encourage activity, aid relaxation, or generally help us stay healthier and feel better. But the reverse of that, of course, is true. Environments can also make us feel unwell, unsafe, uncomfortable. And sometimes we don't always know why that is. So with this guide, we weren't talking about specific and identifying specific characteristics or neurodivergent characteristics, because we wanted to focus on barriers, because there's such a wide range of people that this impacts. Sometimes people can be triggered having migraines, but without understanding the context of the environment that has created that. So there's a really wide range of people this impacts. And for some people, of course, the negative impacts are multiplied, limiting their ability to carry out daily activities. So PAS 6463 aims to provide the first step to national guidance, pulling together existing research, knowledge and expertise into one document to give us a starting place. So it was never, it's not the end of the road by any means. And I'm hoping I've pressed next slide and it's not moving. Oh, and there it is. Hopefully it's not going to now jump through. Okay, so this is just some key facts about the PAS. It's a publicly available specification. If you're not familiar with that, the PAS is like a first step. Its delivery is generally quicker than a British standard. Its full title is Design for the Mind, Neurodiversity in the Built Environment Guide. Just in case you're interested, 6463 was chosen as it reads mind on an old style telephone pad. It signposts to other standards and guidance, so it doesn't repeat things, it points in directions, which generally is the philosophy of all British standards. It covers design and management as they are integral. The content applies to most building types, including commercial, public, workplaces, and residential, but it doesn't include specialist or complex spaces. We felt that that required something else as a next piece of work. And the target audiences are architects, engineers, designers, planners, decision makers, employers, indeed anybody who's interested. And I thought it was important to let you know that download is free. That was sponsored by Sport England. So you can go to the link that is on the slide and you can download your copy for free if you don't have one already. Sorry, I'm waiting for it to move. I don't know whether you're seeing it faster than me. Nope. Okay. So the significance of the PAS is, as I said, it was really the first guidance. It's not the first time it's been written about, but it's at a national level, and it's the pulling together of quite disparate research and information into one easily referenced location. So it gives us a starting point. It gives us an opportunity to learn and build upon that existing knowledge. At the end, or after, I think, 18 months, BSI will evaluate the PAS and collect any additional research and information. And consideration of neurological difference within the early stages of design can eliminate or reduce barriers with no additional cost. So that's really the primary aim of it. Just very briefly, what is neurodiversity? So we're all neurodiverse, and it's about how we think and process information. It's about how we communicate, learn things, how we get from A to B, and just generally how we experience the world, and how we interact with that. So in terms of terminology, neurodiversity is everybody. We are all under that heading. We're all neurodiverse. Neurotypical means within normal parameters. I mean, that's very difficult to define, normal parameters. We potentially all sit outside what would be defined as normal parameters on some aspects of who we are. And then neurodivergent is recognized as sitting outside the neurotypical model. And neurodegenerative is having a progressive condition such as dementia. Sorry. It's just not highlighting and moving on, sorry. No. Oh, maybe I can do it like that. Right. There we go. So the aim of the PAS is to influence design. And there are sort of three key, I mean, there's a lot of information in the document, but there's three key things. It's about giving choice, clarity, and control, reducing negative sensory impact, and also providing a calm space for recovery. And the picture you see is within the PAS, and it's an example at Heathrow. At Terminal 5, they created quieter routes around the duty-free area, which got very busy. And it's a great example of where they provide choice. And there's another example. This is from the Museum of London, and it's a sensory map to tell people particular impacts in particular areas. So whether they're particularly busy, whether they're bright spaces, just giving people that information that they can perhaps again make choices about where they want to go. And last of all, just TFL activities. So this is across quite a wide range because we collect information from our customers and on the impacts. So things like busy trains, the response of other customers. There are all kinds of things that impact on people's journey. And they impact, again, a lot of these impact on everybody, but there's a more acute impact from that where people are neurodivergent. And so we try and find different ways, right through from construction and design and how we design, right through to management, to campaigns. So some of the things that we've done is making sure that our frontline staff are visible and available and that they have training in this area. Information is provided, particularly around changes and impacts to journeys. This is a constant work in progress. I'm not saying that TFL have cracked this. I don't think we have. And the demand for information is ever increasing, but it is something that is constantly evolving and being delivered. As another contribution, obviously, we developed the PAS 6463. We have campaigns like Travel Kind and hate crime campaigns. We have vast stakeholder engagement through all sorts of different levels of stakeholder engagement to understand where the negative impacts are. And our staff network and supporting our staff and creating a neurodivergent workforce as well is really important. And then we carry out research, for example, in the picture on colourful crossings, which is, whilst we understand the impact of vibrant and noisy patterns, etc., in our built environment, we're carrying out research at the moment more specifically on colourful crossings. So, the research does develop further and further. So there's a huge range of disabilities, and for this reason, we don't take a singular disability approach, but instead focus on the barrier, whether physical, communication, attitudinal, acknowledging different people or groups that may experience different barriers more acutely. And neurodivergence is considered throughout our entire approach to making the network more accessible. Thank you. That's the last one.
Thank you so much, Simone. While I've got you, that was a really great introduction. You mentioned PAS 6463 being kind of the first step regarding national guidance. What kind of national guidance do you hope will come out in the future, or the next step, I suppose?
Well, the next step that we're looking at, because just so you know, it hasn't sort of been delivered and then disappeared. It's been evidence that we have consistent, regular, and very high levels of downloads. So there's a lot of interest that's evident. I know it helps because it's free, but it also, that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's interested. So there is a high level of interest. We've actually retained the steering group, and we had a meeting recently. And we found that there's stimulated interest already in terms of what we need to research. Now, I mean, BSI don't carry out research, so we're very reliant on other people's research. But I do think it has kind of brought that community together. And then what will happen is the PAS is reviewed after 18 months. Yeah. And what we anticipate is it will either be incorporated into another section of BS 8300, or it will become its own British standard underneath that inclusion umbrella. We're not entirely sure of the best way of doing that at the moment, but it is a work in progress. And I'd absolutely encourage everybody that has pieces of research they think is relevant or anything like that, that BSI, and I mean, I sit on the B559 committee, which is the one responsible for inclusive design. So I mean, I'm quite happy to receive any information on this, but I know BSI, if people want to contact BSI directly, they will collect information as well, and we will put all of that into consideration at the next stage of development.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Simone. I'm going to pass over to our second speaker, Briette. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Holly, for the introduction. Let me just find my presentation, which has suddenly disappeared. Okay. Can you all see that?
That's perfect. Thank you, Riet.
Okay, thank you, Holly, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this discussion. This is a topic very close to my heart. So where do I come from? I'm a planning consultant, which might be slightly unusual talking about the design and delivery of neurodivergent spaces, but I do believe that actually the design process is very much a multidisciplinary process, and it's important that all the different professions that actually play a role in design work towards the creation of more inclusive spaces. So at HDA Design, we've spent a lot of time over the last few years thinking more about the design for well-being and how the role of our various professions and what we deliver, the homes and the spaces we deliver, how that contribute and to wider social value. I played a role in establishing the RIBA's social value toolkit, and I think looking at how we think about neurodiversity more is very much part of delivering wider social value. Within our practice, we take equality and diversity very serious, and we do as much as we can to celebrate difference and to create a workspace that feels inclusive for everyone. And on a very personal level, this topic is important to me. I have 2 children who are neurodiverse, covering autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, and I'm very familiar with how the urban environment and buildings itself can be quite debilitating. So HTA specializes in the design of homes and the places around them. And sometimes, unlike some of the other architectural sort of sectors, if you do an office design or a specialist design, customer satisfaction plays a really important role. And strangely, the housing sector is very much behind with that. And therefore, actually, anything that can help us think more about how specifically we need to alter design to make these places more inclusive and how we can listen better would be good. And I think therefore something like post-occupancy evaluation is really quite important so that we learn how to design places better. So I have referred to our office, and I will look a bit more at it later on. And we cover a wide variety of different disciplines. So the 3 areas that I really think is very important is first of all, the design process itself, how we engage with communities, and actually how we make sure that we create an engagement process that allows for the full diversity of voices of humankind in the process. How we can actually look at design itself to facilitate more inclusive spaces and homes, and lastly, also how we facilitate more inclusive access in the design professions. And actually, we've seen a real change sort of over the last 2-3 years. A lot more professional bodies are now speaking about neurodiversity, which I think is a very, very positive sign. There's Engineering Neurodiverse Futures program by Foothold, which is very interesting. The RTPI, which I'm a member of, speaks a lot about neurodiversity, and I think these are all very good signs. So Simone has already referred to what might be covered by neurodiversity. It's more or less 20% of the population that are neurodiverse. So it's a significant amount, and therefore really important that we include considerations for that. So Simone has also touched on some of the aspects that can be overwhelming for people. So sound. noise, the spatial and layout of buildings, and any unwanted or extreme sensory feedback, for example, smell, touch or taste, can really affect people quite significantly. And Simone has already touched on the new PAS standard, which I think is fantastic in that it is actually really quite clear on what are the different considerations that we do need to start taking into account. Unlike various other things that we're trying to really make more tangible, is how actual design decisions contribute to social value, and the lack of evidence about that. I think the PAS is really a wonderfully clear tool. So in our office, so HDA Design moved into new offices just before Christmas last year. So we bought a warehouse which we refurbished, and thinking about how we can facilitate a comfortable space to work in for all our members of staff was really at the forefront of the design of the space, which we did as a practice with another refurbishment organization. So we were very conscious of incorporating elements such as very clear signage. The entire building has been soundproofed at ceiling level. It has a very calm color palette, and there's lots of natural features throughout, plants. There's a choice of environment and lighting conditions, so no one actually has a specific seat. You can come in and choose where you want to sit, and the wonderful thing about it is that some spaces have very tall ceiling height, but as you progress through the building, which is really a set of 4 different buildings, you can find spaces that feel more contained, more private, where lighting conditions are slightly different. If lighting is a bit too bright, you can go and sit in areas towards the back of the building that are quieter, where you can use more artificial lighting. And also there's a large variety of private spaces which you can retreat to. Another thing that we also see in other projects where we design for specific user groups, homes, for example, for autistic people. Another element that is incorporated in our office is that there's a choice of where you can enter the building depending on how you feel. There is the main entrance, which is very visible, but there's also an opportunity to enter the building much more private through the bike store, and a separate stair at the back. And this is something in some of our other projects that we have seen, the whole idea of progressive privacy, alternative entry points, a number of different lighting conditions, allowing choice. Simone referred to choice quite a lot. The ability to retreat, to be private, the ability to know where smells might be and how you can keep away from that. Within our practice, we have a neurodiversity group that meet on a monthly basis. And this is really a forum for our members of staff to give feedback on what we can do better as a practice to facilitate neurodiversity. We talk about projects we're doing, what we can do more in terms of changing the way that we think about incorporating design decisions, how we can challenge design reviews, which we do on a weekly basis with questions around how we have thought about the people who will live in some of the spaces we design. And then we facilitate a training program with some external speakers. And the photos of my colleague Adam, who leads on the Neurodiversity Forum with me, who has ADHD and has given his view quite publicly on how he feels the new office facilitates choice and calmness. I think something that we need to think a lot more about is that the way the traditional type of community engagement we do when we work on a lot of different housing projects, how we make sure that we engage with people in a variety of ways, not all members of the public would like to come in and look at a set of display boards and speak to architects, we need to think about different ways. And I actually think now post-COVID that we use sort of tech a lot more, different types of forums to engage with projects, different ways of providing feedback, maybe allowing some people to walk through an exhibition with some headsets on with a pre-recorded voice explaining what the boards are saying. We need to think a lot more about different ways. And particularly, it's more developed, I think, in office design and other specific buildings, but in the housing sector, thinking a lot more around how we can incorporate or use post-occupancy evaluation, not only to think about building efficiency, but real user experience. And that's really me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riet. We had a question which I'm going to throw out to you now, if that's okay, while I've got you. Someone's asked about 75 Wallace Road, you mentioned soundproofing. They've asked, what do you mean by soundproofing? And was this calculated and on what basis?
So I'm not a technical expert, but we sprayed the entire extent of the building with a coverage. It's a type of soundproofing that's sprayed on the ceiling throughout the entire building, and it just stops noise from reflecting a lot because it's such a wide open space that noise doesn't reverberate at all. So it contains it really, really well. And we looked at a lot of different options because where we were previously, we had you can have sort of round things that you can hang from the ceiling, and it just didn't really work. This particular spray works fantastically well. I can always look it up what it is. I'm not a technical person, but it's definitely something that we thought about, a lot of different options, and the treatment went through the entire building. We decided not just to limit it to spaces where we want to facilitate talks or where we do our design reviews, but we just treated the entire building with it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Riet. Clive, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Holly, and thank you, Riet and Simone. So I'm going to take a very slightly different twist on what we've been talking about today, and I want to talk to you about how we have, I'm just sharing my screen, how we have, can everybody see my screen okay is the first question?
Yeah, that's perfect, Clive.
Very good. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach to neurodiversity at BDG and also our process. So, and you know, these themes, you know, all the speakers today have been talking about, and I think our view is very much design is for everyone. And you know, a few years ago, we undertook a vet school design up in Scotland. Apart from that, we're designing for one species. And you know, it should be a lot simpler. And I think the key thing that that I'd like to get across to everybody today is that actually inclusive design is the process of taking everybody with you. And it starts with communication. It starts with language. And I think that we talk about things such as disability. And what I'm showing you today is an excerpt from our inclusive design presentation. And we talk about, you know, historically, not so much now, but historically we've spoken of the mentally ill and terms like that. And they're always, you know, they're terms of exclusion. And actually, we want to see that it's actually environments. It's the built environment that can either disable or empower people, not the people themselves. So just before I get into our approach, I just want to talk a little bit about representation and voice. And this is key for our approach, I think, overall. Don't worry if you can't see some of the detail here. I'll briefly talk through this. So this is the figures from the Architects Registration Board for this year, and it's really their view of inclusivity and diversity across the profession. And looking at the different groups you can see there as age, disability, etc. What it shows quite clearly is that the larger part of the architectural profession are largely white, they're largely male, they're largely 30 to 50, they're largely straight, and quite diverse in religion, interestingly. And I tick quite a few of those boxes. I might sit slightly outside the age range, but it just shows you that before we can actually start to see an alternative perspective, we've got to see where our perspective is, and we've got to see, we've got to move away from the familiar and start moving in, start training ourselves in thought of how to see somebody else's point of view. And that's really how our approach to inclusive design is. So if we look at neurodiversity, there's a range of conditions. This is just a few. There are others that it affects, and we've talked on those already. But these are the more common ones. And I've included vertigo here. Vertigo is not often included, but if you're somebody that has vertigo, if you have an attack of vertigo, your experience of your surroundings can be very similar to other people with recognized conditions. So it's important to understand, certainly, that it's not, we talk about the neurodivergent here, but actually many of us can experience the symptoms of these states of mind when we're ill or when we're stressed, or a combination of those things. And it's important to realize it's fluid, and actually through illness and other conditions, we can go through periods where we will experience these things. And actually outside of that, there are common trends that we'll see in the workplace. So obviously we've spoken about the past. I'm not going to talk about that. I think Simone's gone into some detail on that. It's very useful. It's very process driven, which is useful, and I will talk a little bit on that overall. So it's an extremely useful document for everybody, including clients as well, and design teams in working together. So in a nutshell, what does the PAS seek to do? And it very clearly states there's three primary areas that the PAS wants to establish. So it's reducing the potential for sensory overload, and we live increasingly in an information-rich environment. So, and that seems to be building. It doesn't seem to be receding at all. So I certainly know that, and I'm sure everybody on this is very similar, in that people can communicate, they can talk to us. That's becoming increasingly rare. We can have a telephone call. We can have that telephone call over a number of different platforms. We can have it on our laptop, on our phones, but not as a phone call. We can communicate. Certainly in our studio, we communicate an awful lot through different channels, which actually get quite confusing. People will ask a question on one medium and then they'll jump to another, and that can actually cause quite a problem in the workplace generally. So the PAS is also there to move people through a process to provide flexibility and choice, and we've seen that in today's speaker's presentation, and to offer places for recovery and respite. And just to focus on that last statement for a minute, to offer places for recovery and respite when needed, and these come straight from the PAS. It's interesting to note that everybody, whether we're whatever our neural condition is and profile is, everybody needs that. And we talk as people are working more and more in open plan workspaces, and BDG are workplace is our key work area. It's something that we've spent an awful lot of time over many decades working in, and we specialize in repurposing buildings, and it's quite important from that perspective of how those buildings that are often sometimes can be a little difficult to work with in current regulatory framework, but to offer places for recovery and respite when needed. When somebody says, "Oh, I need to get my head down, I've got to finish this report," or "I just need a quiet room to do so and so," that is everybody making that choice for recovery and respite, because you want to do a particular task and you need an environment that enables you to do that, and that's what an enabling environment can do. It provides choice, it provides that flexibility. So just talking a little bit about some of the processes itself, the key aspect that we found, and this is where the most successful outcomes across all our projects for inclusivity, for access, for neurodesign, the key thing behind all that is communication. And it's talking to the client, and often we can learn from some of our clients. Some of our clients are are probably more aware of certain aspects of their staff and what they need than we certainly will be at the start of a project. And there's a huge opportunity to learn from each other in that, and that's where we see the best outcomes happening. So it's communication, it's documenting, and then there's some clear guidance in the PAS, and I've just listed them there. I'm not going to go through them, but it's using that and it's building on that knowledge to provide a range of spaces. And I want to briefly talk about the key findings of PAS and the nuts and bolts of what we need to do for recognizing neurodiversity in design. Now I'm just going to talk through these briefly. This is not a page of do not do this. These are general images. Everything will have its place. It needs to be considered in its design, but these show demonstrably how certain types of environment can be triggered. These images, by the way, or in the main, are from the internet, so they're quite widely available. Item 2 I'll come on to because it isn't a specific location, which is quite interesting. But it's strong geometric design, strong contrast that you'll see there. Image 3 there, the long corridor. I mean, that's long been a trope of psychological horror films. So it's not just people that may align to a neurodivergent condition. It can be everybody that finds. It's a dystopian image in that sense. Strong linear lighting has been shown to be an issue, and obviously repetitive geometric pattern, and obviously environments that somehow manage to combine all these. Image 2 there is an interesting one, and it's quite common, and any of you that have looked at any level of access design will see there are commonalities and actually areas where dealing with one particular issue might create problems for another. But item 2 there, that's actually from the westbound services stations on the M3 for anybody that uses it. It's a relatively new building. I think it's been there probably no more than about 10 years. And this is the floor finish. And I find it slightly odd that if people have been driving on the motorway for any length of time, you want to break from looking at little white lines flashing past, and nonetheless, they seem to have provided that in abundance. And also with neurological conditions, they can mimic other conditions. As Riette was saying, you might find people that experience the built environment that have Asperger's and autism. There are similarities in how people with dementia will experience that environment. And actually people with partial sight might be equally confused by an environment with a floor finish such as item 2. Simply because it's very difficult with light and shadow appearing like that to see whether it's actually a change in level. So there are lots of good reasons outside of neurodiversity to actually consider and document the approach to the design to ensure that that has been considered in the process. And if there's a problem that's highlighted, then it can be managed before it gets on site and before it becomes a major issue. And similarly, this is what we've called at BDG soothers. And again, this isn't a you should do this. This is actually just really, they're just images, and again, largely culled from the internet. And they're really just suggestions of how you might approach a space. And if you have got strong linearity in a space, consider breaking that up. You consider neutral and certainly natural materials, because as we've, as a species, we've been around possibly a good 1 million to 2 million years. As an urbanized species, we've probably only done that for the last few thousand years. And we've not necessarily evolved to deal with the environments that we're now creating. If we have corridors, look at ways, which we clearly need to do in certain environments, look at ways of breaking those up, look at ways of how you can find, coming back to that, providing respite, look at avenues that might break up that strong linearity and might give people opportunities to either rest or stop or not be constantly looking at the corridor. Lighting and acoustics play key considerations, and I think, again, our most successful projects, we've got a lighting consultant, we've got an acoustician on board, so we can monitor not just how sound is transferred from room to room and how lighting might be, but how sound is in an open space, the reverberation. Can that cause problems with reflective surfaces, etc.? And again, these are not something that just people that are diagnosed as being on the so-called neurodivergent spectrum. This is something that we all face. If you're in a highly reflective environment, acoustically reflective environment, there's going to be a lot of reverberation, and you'll actively need to filter out if you want to concentrate some of that sound. So it's just simple things like that, and we do respond to natural things very, very well. So creating, natural forms in an interior environment can really support design for people that are neurodivergent. And I mentioned that we're on, we live in an incredibly information-rich age. Screens are everywhere, and they're not going to go away. But how they're used in an environment, where they're placed in that environment, and how they're read in that environment can equally be important. So they're all considerations as part of building up the design. So just touching back on the PAS, the PAS is actually very good, and this is more or less taken straight from the PAS. It actually sets out the approaches that you should take, the kind of the key stages, if you like, that you should be doing for each of the REBA work stages. And it's a very useful tool just to see how you can engage, with client, how you can engage with client user groups, and I thoroughly recommend that. And equally, how you can engage at different steps, what you should be doing when through the design process. And as Simone and Ria have mentioned, it's that needs to be through the design process and beyond. So very much on post occupational analysis, that it's kind of vital to understand and get feedback, because otherwise we can't learn from what we're doing, and that's really important. So just to wrap up, assessment is quite important. So we have a detailed access auditing process. Part of that, and again, don't worry, I appreciate you won't be able to see this on screen so easily, but that process also includes neurodiversity, and it takes through the key steps for acoustics, for lighting, for material and colour and contrast considerations. And I think that's a useful tool, not just to do once at some point in the design process, but to do it at the start of the design process, because it can help as an aide-memoire to document the aspirations for the project. It can be used as then a monitor through the design process to ensure that you're aligning to it. And then once you're on site, it can be used because things do change. And it's important to kind of understand that if what might seem like a small change, such as a value engineering exercise that changes some materials, that can actually undo some of your design aspirations. So it's important to monitor, and then carry on doing that once the project is finished. So really, just to wrap up, as I was saying through this, communicate, collaborate, and then create, and that communication is so important. So I would absolutely recommend talk to your clients, find out their experience, work with user groups, and learn from them, because that is the route to a successful outcome on a project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clive. I'm going to ask all of our speakers to come back on the screen now, and we will kick off the Q&A. We've had a lot of questions, and we're definitely not going to get through them all, but we'll get through as many as we can. I'm going to kick off with a broad one. What are the main barriers when it comes to designing for neurodiversity? And I guess more importantly, how can these be overcome?
Well, after just finishing that, what I'd say is not communicating.
Yep. Okay.
If it's, you could sit down and read the PAS from cover to cover, it will give you a lot of good approaches, but it can't. It's no substitute for experience. And if you don't have specific experience, and I have some experience in certain areas, but I don't have experience in others, and for that, you need to talk to people that do. So that's why I'm a huge advocate of working with client user groups, because certainly we work with a lot of quite large organizations, and those organizations will invariably have representation groups that you can talk to, and there's often stigma about how do you label people, how do you talk to people, and it's like asking someone's name. Talk to them, ask them, and the feedback you get from that is so important to informing the design process.
Brilliant. Riette, Simone, did you have anything to add?
I would just add to that I think it's quite different looking at what you design. So I think if you design an office or a hospital or a library or a medical health center, it's I think we are slightly more advanced at asking or listening to the people who use these spaces. I think housing design is running slightly behind, and sometimes if you look at, for example, large apartment buildings, the considerations for making a very efficient building might mean that you have 8 flats to a corridor, and there's no natural light coming in, and these are the design decisions that we need to start building in, and it's more difficult because, of course, you're facing viability consideration and finances, and you're up against, unless your client has that in their brief right from the very beginning, then you as a design team are sort of facing needing to produce evidence of why it is important. And we see that with wider well-being considerations, why it is important to take considerations such as natural light, being able to see green spaces, being able to go outside and experience nature. Large-scale purpose-built and actually built-to-rent sector is a lot better because a lot more research is done around customer satisfaction, and some of the spaces that's produced there do produce an element of choice in terms of whether you want to be somewhere quiet, whether you want to share spaces, whether you want to retreat. So I think in the different sectors that we're looking at designing spaces where people inhabit and actually where you work and engage, I think there are different considerations, and I think certain sectors are more advanced than others.
Thank you, Riet.
I only wanted to add, I agree with everything, and I only wanted to add that I think in some instances, and obviously there are practices who will do this automatically, and Clive was certainly talking about the processes within their organization, but working for a big organization myself, I really want to stress how processes are really important. So embedding the training, embedding the systems, and making sure the expertise, because I think people get into set ways of doing things, and you can deliver something like the PAS and everybody goes, that's fantastic. Not really sure what it means for me, so I'll carry on doing what I've done for however long. And I just think it's really important that we don't sort of let it go there and expect everybody to suddenly change how they do things. It's a repetition, and I accept some practices will go, well, of course we do it like that, but there are plenty that don't. So it is about embedding and making sure we're asking those questions through the whole process.
Thank you, Simone. We had a question from Thomas. He asked if you could choose only 3 key specifications to help achieve a neurodivergent friendly space, what would they be? I imagine that's quite difficult to answer because we've talked a lot and it's probably a more holistic approach. Can any of you pick just 3?
Well, I think certainly, I'd say natural. We've evolved in a largely natural world before we started to make so many things that we now see in the world. And I think first of all, natural forms and colours that represent the natural environment, that can certainly help. Flexibility and choice of space is, I would say, absolutely critical. And people feel much more comfortable, particularly in a workplace environment, when you've got to do a series of set tasks. People are much more comfortable if they know that the environment they're in is going to support doing those tasks. So if you've got lots of flexibility, you can choose different spaces for different activities, then you're going to feel a lot more predisposed to actually carrying them out successfully. So I'd say that. And I'm now scrabbling around for a third one. But again, I would say moving away from incredible linearity, because it's something we're not used to. And I just have to say, there's a very, very long linear light in the background there. But it's do that with consideration, I think is the important thing. I'm not saying don't do it, and we've certainly done it here and it's been quite successful, but it's do it with consideration and think about how that's balanced.
Thank you, Clive.
Can I add another one? I completely agree with Clive's choices. I would just say I think the ability to both either take part or retreat in any environment that you design is actually a really important consideration. I mean, for public space, for where people walk, for parks, we quite often assume that everyone wants to be sociable. Yes, we need to design to create opportunities to socialize, but I think you also need to design to have places of shelter and being able to retreat. So that's the other one I would add.
I imagine that's fitting for the task as well, not just for neurodivergent individuals. Depending on your task, sometimes you need a different space for it, don't you? Simone, did you want to add any, or do you agree with the three? Perfect. The next question we had was from Elaine on wayfinding. She talked about wayfinding being a challenge for neurodivergent individuals, which we've talked about. What would be your advice for effective wayfinding in a neurodivergent friendly space? Anyone in particular want to answer that?
I'll happily
Yeah.
give that a go. I think wayfinding is hard. I again, probably like most of these subjects, I think they all need work. So, you know, there are various different options. But I think the key thing is information beforehand is probably the one thing I'm going to say. So I know when you're in a space, I think we all know that clarity and making sure we've got the links and the pointers at the right place, and you know the way things are designed can be more intuitive than others. I don't think it often in environments I work in, you can't get rid of signage. You still need it. They're quite complex areas, but you know, again, you can rely on other aspects that create that environment. But I wanted to highlight information beforehand. Most people who are aware of whether it's a physical barrier that is going to stop them traveling, or it is other pieces of surprise, etc., that is going to stop them traveling, they will want that information up front. So that's information including, you know, and I am talking from my perspective, but changes to timetabling, changes to service, changes to, you know, whatever is happening, works in the street, you know, changes to time, whatever it is that can completely throw people off, and actually make the rest of the journey much harder, and less able to face the potential barriers that will then increase. So information beforehand as well as good wayfinding on site is key.
Thank you, Simone. We've talked a little bit about sensory overload and limiting sensory overload and creating more calm spaces. Does creating calm spaces come at the risk of abandoning distinctiveness in our designs? Do you guys think? Clive, you're smiling at me.
Well, it's literally because we had a client that will remain nameless that actually came to us not too long ago and said, "Oh, we'd like a neurodivergent room, please." And that was just the one. And it was just like, oh, how do we start with this? And it was an incredibly information rich, I think that's the best way to put it, environment. So again, we that's the point. Again, the communication thing kicks in. You have to kind of take a step back and find ways of opening the discussion of what neurodiversity means and how it can apply in a particular built environment setting, and then from there start to lead them down a particular route. I don't think it does become limiting. I think there are all sorts of limitations, regulatory limitations across design. There's building regulations, a whole bunch of different things. Increasingly, we're finding as well, building regulations lags behind quite some way. Currently there's nothing about neurodivergency in the building regulations, and it would be great if, appreciate can't all be in there, but it would be great if that would happen. But we see insurance dictate how a building should be, sometimes more so than the building regulations. But I think what we find is those challenges sometimes actually bring out more creativity, because you've really got to apply yourself to the problem, understand how you can do that and still maintain the design integrity of what you're doing. But for me, that design integrity, it's the building's got to work. And I don't, for me, it's certainly not, you can either have a great design or you can have a space that suits everybody. If it's not suiting everybody, it's not a great design.
Riet, you're nodding. I'm assuming you agree. Yeah. Thank you very much. We also had a question from Cypron. Is there any data research that indicates that neurodivergent individuals can have their needs positively enhanced when low carbon materials are used? I'm assuming he's asking about kind of the crossover between designing for diversity and also designing for sustainability.
I think we look at materiality quite a bit, and we look across and over the years, some of that's been successful, some less so, as we trial different things. I think just taking the question as it is, any direct correlation between something just being, low embodied carbon or something and its benefits purely on neurodivergency, I'm not sure if, certainly I've not seen any. Yeah. And I'm certainly not an expert in that field, but I think it would be very hard to gauge that. I think across the board with people's neuro profiles, a lot more research needs to be done generally to see, and by that it means much bigger study groups being done to actually start to understand how, getting some data from that will help, and that's just not there yet. Hopefully things like the PAS will enable that to happen. But I think, yeah, it's very, I certainly couldn't say, yeah, there's bound to be some form of correlation, because I don't know whether there is or not.
No problem at all. While we're on the PAS, Ian's asked, does the PAS cover the design of external spaces and the public realm? It seems very building focused.
I don't disagree with that. It does. It's not perhaps as clear as now BS 8300 is, for example, that is divided into 2 copies, so you can sort of look up the external. There's a lot that starts off internal but actually does apply to the external as well. So there are threads throughout, there are pieces and there are commentaries on the external environment. But that said, it was patently evident that most of the information that was available was focused around buildings, and that very little was focused around the external environment. And yes, that didn't go unnoticed. Again, what I would say is you can transfer a lot of the information that is available on how we respond within internal environments applies across external environments as well. And just because it doesn't say external doesn't mean you can't logically make the transition across. But I am hoping that there will be more research in this area. Hopefully that will be a development.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simone. I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left. I could probably ask you questions for another hour. Would you all like to just say your key kind of takeaway, what you want people to go away from this session fresh on their minds? We'll go round, take turns. Clive, do you want to start? What would be your kind of key?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said it, to be honest, but I think, in any project you're embarking on, look at your own processes and see if they're not already suitable for wider access and neurodivergency issues. Then there's plenty of publicly available information, at least of which it has, to do that. But communicate, talk to people, and listen to what they have to say.
Brilliant. Simone?
I actually think, what Clive said applies across the board and is really important. But I think other than that, I would also say that it is very difficult to be experts in everything.
Yeah.
And I think I would always consider that whilst you develop your own methods of covering everything, don't forget that there are experts out there, depending on the size and scale of your project, that you can call on as well as stakeholder engagement. And you really do need the 2, and that may be in-house or it may be external, but you really need those 2 things to bring a whole project together. You need the understanding from a technical and expert point of view, and you need the external stakeholder feedback for the specific project.
Thank you, Simone. Riet?
I think something again that I think the PAS is great, because I think it makes it very clear the different areas that we need to focus on when we design. Clive's point about if you have a building that is designed for everyone to be able to function well, then it's really good design. And I think this is sort of with a focus on neurodiversity as well, I think we need to look at wider well-being when we design, because that is what will actually make all of us able to function in the environment and the different spaces that we design. I mean, it's very important to look at these very specific factors and to make it possible for inclusivity across the board. But I think the focus of all of it should be on well-being. And actually, in terms of research, there's a lot more research out there on what specific design choices contributes to overall well-being.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. For all the questions that I might collate all the questions, I'm sure the panelists would be happy to kind of continue the conversation post-webinar, but that is definitely all we have time for. Thank you so much to all our speakers. It's been incredible to hear from you. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. We do have 2 more sessions tomorrow, which will be the final day of Social Value Live. We have a session on delivering social value in construction projects, and also a session on how to embed social value from project inception. They're set to be really interesting conversations, so please do join us for them. And thank you to everyone that tuned in this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.